That was a really nice panel discussion, and actually leads into quite a lot of what I want to talk to today, actually, because many of those discussion points are actually things that we have invested in. So this is going to be kind of an overview about how it all fits together, because over the years you've seen many releases from Fujifilm where we talk about an individual type of project or a technology or so forth. So this is kind of the integrated vision of all of it coming together for antibodies. So just a quick note about us. We basically have an enormous portfolio and capability from process development to commercial, drug substance, drug product, across all of your clinical supply needs, into commercial for microbial, mammalian, and advanced therapies, right? And of course now Fujifilm at large is reaching out into many other spaces within the ecosystem as well. We go to the next slide. So the CDMO division has three main sites currently in Texas, North Carolina, and the UK. And I come from the Texas site, but many of the things I'm going to talk about were collected across our entire network and from some of our colleagues in Japan as well, to bring all of that together and to bear. So a really important thing for us is this sort of tagline, but it means a lot more to us and we like to present this out at the beginning, because this really, at the end of it, is what we're trying to achieve for our clients. So if we're partnering for life, I really like that because I'm into puns. So obviously the one people think about are the lives of patients, and that's true, and that's great, and that is what drives us all. But it's really about the life cycle of the product, the program, and looking at the client's needs, right? So their partnering needs across that whole spectrum, so we can become a really true integrated partner across all the different kind of areas they're working in. And to me personally, being an old CMC guy, what we're all aiming for is to get to that commercial quality CMC in the most efficient way possible. So this partnering word doesn't really mean anything if we're just transacting with the clients and put them into a cul-de-sac that they then need to come out of to eventually get to where they're going. So for us to understand where they're going, we need to understand what are the constraints in your business, what's your business model, what are you looking for, what are you worried about, what are your have-to-haves, what are your fallbacks, what are your hedges, what are you going to do with this asset, right? So these are all things that we want to understand to deliver an optimal approach. So a really important thing that going to keep coming back is we're really involved with using risk-based tools. So, it's really critical for a modern quality system to be risk-based validation. But there's a lot of other kinds of risks that we need to really take into account when we're looking for a modern approach to manufacturing. So we've obviously got the risk to patient, and we know a lot about that, and that's absolutely critical, right? Then biosafety and the importance of the safety for the operators and for the environment and for the community and for some of the things that could be handled. And then the business risk and continuity, and then down to cost controls, constructability, cost of goods going forward, because we want to deliver you that commercial capability on the back end of our relationship. And then you have to perform this at each stage as you go through, is whether you're doing construction or whether you're doing a development cycle, et cetera. And you have to consider all these things. Now the problem is that the hard things about that sounds very easy, but the hard things about that is it's really difficult to capture the cost of non-conformance. And then opportunity cost is another enormously hard thing to bring into the conversation as we go forward on these things. And then the other thing is, oftentimes these risks or risk controls that you put into place actually conflict and create a problem in a different area. It could create a business problem. Like a classic one is, we're going to add controls to increase quality, but then it creates an unacceptable cost basis. That would be an example of a conflicting risk need, right? And then what that leads to is you've got to get into an iterative approach, and you really need to understand the degrees of freedom that you have open to yourself, right? And that really is important to communicate with a client and get their understanding of what those drivers are in their business, the have-to-haves. Is it the timing? Is it the cost of goods? Is it the, what is the thing that's critical to drive to? And then you need a team matrix to go through this, and SMEs, and then that can play into organizational power as well. And go ahead and hit it one more time. So that means when you're looking at sort of next generation manufacturing, that set the stage, right? Because you can't just look at, well, we're going to use perfusion. You can't isolate that from the facility or the training of the people, and you certainly have to target it to the needs of the client. So for us, we have to consider across all these various topics to create an optimized, integrated approach to the supply of this material, right? And so to get to an overall configuration, you take this integrated risk assessment approach, and really the idea is you're going to provide critical drug supply at the expected time at the required quality, right? So that's really the important thing. And then in a forward-looking way, in a partnering way, we've got the systematic QVD approach so that it helps the partner companies get to a commercial quality CMC most efficiently. So more than hopefully they could do it by themselves, for sure, because that's why they're coming to us, and more efficiently than they could do hopefully with other corporate partners. And then that leads us to invest to maximize engineering controls that go beyond the risk to patient, but enable and engage the operational model of the facility, because time has a huge value, right? So again, how do you capture that cost in non-conformance? How do you capture that cost of delay, right? And then how do we take our engineering controls up here when the patient risk says you need to be here? And that interval creates a huge robustness in the capability, okay? And then what we've done over time, as you've seen across through the Fuji announcements, as you've seen significant investments in these critical areas that all come together. So cell line, Apollo X, media, Irvine Scientific, closure. In our Texas facility, we're doing fully ballroom closed processing, because that gives a higher quality and it gives lower risk that you're going to delay the disposition of the batch. Consumables, working through the cost of goods around single use. The process, you heard Andy Topping go into detail in all of the areas that we're investing in process capabilities, which may be applicable to one client but not to another. Really innovative facilities across the platform, and then the huge one for us is around our people and getting great people, investing in our people, training our people. So Andy did a great job of really talking to that. So I'm going to just quickly click through some of these pieces that come together, and then we'll bring it back together at the end. So our Apollo cell line, and now Apollo X, where we've significantly reduced the timeline to get to a cell bank, which is really nice. And next, go ahead. It comes with all the great quality aspects that we had before, and also now much higher titers. And this is really critical, so let's remember this piece as we go forward. Going to the next one. So, as we're talking about partnering through this, when we talk about next generation manufacturing, we all know that reaches back into the process development laboratory. So if we're not setting a risk-based, a parameter space, data-rich approach to process development, then we have no way of understanding what our limitations, our ability, our constraints, our degrees of freedom are when we go to design a facility or go to design the control strategy around a process or bring together a really streamlined CMC package, right? So this is really critical for us, and we've invested quite a lot into systematic process development. And again, Andy did a great job of taking you guys through that previously. So we can come into facilities. So we have a large, very advanced facility in Texas where we've set up a modified ballroom manufacturing capability. And this gives us an ability to give a large capability into our clients, great capacity, because it allows us to do multi-product in the upstream. okay? And then it also allows us to do some other really critical things when it comes to taking clients on the arc from early phase into commercial launch. So you'll notice we're using isolators for all of our shake flask work, for example. That's very unusual. It is not required to cover the risk to the patient because it's highly detectable, let's say if you had a contamination in your shake flask. But what that does is that creates an investigation, that creates an ongoing issue, potentially if you have multiple programs running at the same time. That then becomes a risk to dispositioning those batches on time. So what do? We invested in closure technology to basically take all of that off the table and to separate those critical processes away from the operators. Okay. In fact, closure is so important to us, we've elevated it to a higher level of validation. So we maintain this under a process lifecycle approach. So we started up the facility, we did an initial amount of work, a number of experiments, and then we went into continuous verification, and we just recently, after 18 months of operation, have come back around and redone all of our risk assessments. And I will show you a little bit of outcome from that. Go to the next one. So here was an example of a risk-based design I talked about briefly, and it's around doing multi-product and knock in the same room using several sets of isolators and intrinsic 6-log VHP kill with bioquell systems. And the kind of level we go to control risks around contact hazard, airborne hazard, et cetera. Because we want to inbuild all the data which says this cannot be a risk to that. And it's all pre-documented. Go to the next one. So as I mentioned, we've been operating for about 18 months, completely closed, 2,000 liter scale. And to this point, we have yet to recover any bioburden in our downstream. Even to the point after TFF, prior to bulk filtration, we have recovered no bioburden in either of our in-process streams or in our buffer systems. So this is the behavior we were looking for, because it's the confirmation and the continuous verification of closure. Truth be told, I wasn't sure we would get there in very first go. But we are continuing on a theoretical basis to continue to update our understanding of the risks and continue to work on that. Go to the next slide, please. So we have the scaling out strategy. So we're coming out of a shutdown right now where we're going to have 3 2,000 liters installed, and we have slots for 6, and we can go to 10 by 2,000 liter. Next slide. All right. So we've scaled all our chromatography, so we can operate you from 500 liter at low titer up to 4,000 liter at high titer with our Apollo X cell line as needed. Next slide. And then we've developed a large TFF system, which now enables single use to go up to 40 square meters, which is about 4 times what has been typically available. And to work on campaign mode, it also is going to allow us to actually clean TFF membranes and reuse them. So for a commercial supply standpoint where we need to keep costs down, it's better. So from a standpoint of our process, here's the core process for a MAB, very standard for people. And then we have all the process validation, everything set up around this. When we need to scale the output, and click again, then we can actually use these 10 by 4,000 liters to multiplex into a downstream. So it allows us, with that technology we previously showed with the chromatography and the TFF, that allows us in a very low risk manner and previously tied into our process validation strategy to bring you to an equivalent of a 4,000 liter bioreactor. And that's going to have profound positive impacts on cost of goods and the productivity of the facility. So as an example, if you're operating with Apollo X at 10 grams per liter, we're multiplexing into a 4,000 liter. The net effect of that is fully single use in the lowest risk manner to go towards commercial we can produce on order of 250 kilograms a month. And that's in the same facility where you did your phase 1 manufacturing. Okay, go to the next slide. Which leads us to another really critical area, which is to make sure that you're getting yourselves set up from the very beginning for process validation and process characterization. So, I've done a lot in my career in different places to do risk-based process validation. I'm using the ASTM E2500 standard, and Fujifilm has taken this to a whole nother level by creating this wonderful RAPTA tool, which helps streamline that and capture experience that the organization has had. This tool has been successfully used to guide companies into their filings and through PAIs. So it's a battle-tested tool in this space, right? So then go to the next slide. Just keep punching. Yep. So that leads us to our integrated MAB solutions allows us to use all our 3 sites together. It leverages off our process development laboratories. It leverages the technology investments of our parent companies, et cetera. And it really goes to serve, this partnership concept that we have, right? So with that, I want to thank you. We could take some questions. And I know we kind of went over a lot of stuff, but we wanted to present the whole umbrella and how it all ties together finally. So if we want to take a deep dive on any of these topics, if you can find the Fujifilm booth, you can come and talk to us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Page. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
It was a great presentation. How do you deal with a situation where a customer comes to you and they say, we want this done in half the time, half the cost, and we're not willing to take on any of the risk? Because that often seems to be the case. And, obviously it's a dialogue, but not all customers are really willing to entertain that sort of, back and forth.
So I would say in terms of the not taking risk, what we're endeavoring to do is to create these technologies and bring them, and even the new technologies, to create proof of concept to wring the risk out. So we really treat it like we're making our products. Although we do not have any of our own products, we're prohibited from competing with our clients, which I think is a really important thing for a CMO perspective. So that's always a challenge, right? So you say, well, I don't want that, I want this. So we're making the investments, right? So partly so we can be a little Pollyanna, which is like you're going to get all these risk controls because they're baked into the process, and our standard approach already gives you all of that. In fact, since this is developed to a commercial standard, you get the benefit of that by having phase 1 supply being made with approaches, equipment, et cetera, that are basically having a commercial qualified, right, approach. Then I'm not going to get into how we price versus phase or any of that kind of stuff, but yeah. So, I sidestepped the question a little bit. There's still that tension, but again, we're trying to deal with it by just intrinsically investing and wringing all that out and just make it available. Yeah. So the other thing I should point out is the cell line, the media, et cetera. We're not also here to make money off licensing. So you make a 2,000 liter batch with us, you can get a license to the technology, you can take the process, you can have access to the media, the cell line, all of that, right? So we've done all of this because we want to produce drugs for our clients. That's it.
Terrific. Another question? Yes.
So these days the other popular thing is the scale-out model. How is Fuji accommodating a scale-out model? What are you showed is like up to 2,000 liters. Because depending on the market demand, you may not want to make 250 kilograms a month. It is going to. So do you have a scale-out model where you can get first year 50 kilograms, second year,
Yeah. So I think I mentioned in this facility we can operate in 500 liter for low titer, or we can operate up to 4,000 liter for high titer. Because the equipment we've chosen we maintain the cadence of operation, and whether it's a pre-pack column that's this big or this big, the operators are pretty much still doing the same thing on the same time of the week, right? So what we're maintaining is time in room. So there's a whole bunch of details around how we do that and why we do that. I think the reasons are, I think, pretty self-evident. And then in terms of scaling up, and if you need really huge amounts, there's an answer coming for that too that bolts onto the backside of this. But the critical thing about that is you can launch out of this facility with very low risk. You can create cash flow into your business. And then if you want to scale up and wring the last bit of cogs out, you can do so without being on a critical path and not when the cost of money is extremely high when you're in phase 3, right? So again, we're taking over our experience from, many of us were in product development companies, and we understand, how you bring in money, when you bring in money. And this whole approach is basically geared to deconflict that.